Last year, COP26 raised the bar by focusing on a global ambition for practical and visible climate action by the end of this decade. The package of decisions at COP26 consisted of a range of agreed items, including strengthened efforts to build resilience to climate change, to curb greenhouse gas emissions, and to provide the necessary finance for both. The role of both public and private sectors, as well as international markets, was acknowledged as an integral part of the equation for carbon reductions and climate resilience. COP26 saw the signing of the Glasgow Climate Pact. Nations collectively agreed to work to reduce the gap between existing emission reduction plans and how to limit the increase in global average temperatures to 1.5 degrees through technology, transition, and cooperation. It also saw developed nations reaffirming their $100 billion annual pledge to developing countries and to double the efforts of funding for climate change adaptation. However, there was no agreement on how to deliver this funding. At COP27, the debate around climate finance is expected to be challenging. One of the key successes reported from COP26 was the agreement on an Article 6 rulebook, which marked a significant step forward in the establishment of a global carbon credit market. However, many issues were left to be dealt with in subsequent negotiation rounds. For example, interestingly, the question was raised as to how the global carbon market and the voluntary market could be interlinked, broadening access to market mechanisms and facilitating net zero ambitions. This is particularly topical as we see the launch of newly regulated voluntary carbon credit markets. A nod to the importance of incorporating and strengthening the role of the voluntary carbon markets confirms the opportunity to develop the necessary architecture to enable carbon credit markets to be a functional tool for zero carbon solutions. For the private sector, COP26 saw the announcement of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, with a commitment of $130 trillion of private capital to accelerate the transition to a net zero economy. There was no doubt about the potential of green finance from banks and investors to technology developers and insurers as a means to drive climate action and building a global coalition for carbon neutrality by 2050. So what does this mean for COP27? For all nations, each with their particular challenges, the unprecedented global political, economic, environmental, and social backdrop cannot be ignored, and it may change the aperture of the COP27 negotiations. Quite significantly, at a time when the concept of ESG is making its way into boardrooms, investment decisions, supply chains, consumer preference, and the regulatory landscape, COP26 welcomed the business and finance community to play a more prominent role compared to previous COPs. This sets the precedent for a more open dialogue and a collective goal. With COP27 poised to be the implementation COP, we can expect scrutiny to accelerate and intensify from both investors and consumers on decarbonization plans, KPIs, and implementation strategies. The reality is that these changes are coming, and market participants from investors to businesses should be prepared with credible plans for managing a low carbon environment, achieving emission reductions, and decarbonization of operations. And there's now a premium on sound commitments, selective net zero planning, and focused execution. This applies across public and private entities and across countries and sectors.